you will be quite mad at me after this video, I think. Hi guys, it's Teresa. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking about my most disappointing reads of 2018, and there are a lot. It's almost sad how many disappointing reads I had this year. I also had a lot of good books, and you will see in my best books of 2018 that I definitely had some standouts as well this year, but these are just books that weren't necessarily the worst, but they were just so disappointing. Like, I expected more of them and they let me down pretty much. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's get the one out of the way first that I don't have physically here because I will forget otherwise, and that's Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I loved the Wayward Pines trilogy by Blake Crouch last year / the beginning of this year, and so I wanted to read more by him, and Dark Matter has been hyped up so much on BookTube. Like, people go crazy for this book, and I had very high expectations, let me tell you, based on Wayward Pines alone. Combine that with what I'd heard of it, like, my expectations were through the roof crazy, and they were not met, obviously. Otherwise it wouldn't be in this video. So the book was sold to me as a thriller with sci-fi elements, and I like both thrillers and sci-fi, so I was very much on board, but it's not a thriller. This book is not a thriller, and I got people commenting on the wrap-up video where I talk about it saying, it's not a thriller, like, what made you think that? And the blurb made me think that, because it literally says on the blurb on Goodreads that it's a thriller, and it's not. It's not a thriller. It's not that thrilling. It's pretty predictable towards the ending, and even before, like, I was able to pretty much call all developments because it was so kind of almost straightforward, and there were some attempts at plot twists, but they didn't work for me. As far as the sci-fi elements go, I think it was fine, but honestly, it wasn't that great. I gave it probably 3 stars. It was fine. It's not a bad book, but it also wasn't as fantastic as everybody made it out to be. The next book I was quite disappointed by is Flying Too High by Carrie Greenwood. This is the second book in the Miss Fran Fisher Investigates series, and this series is extremely long. And I really quite enjoyed the first book. I think I gave that about 4 stars, but this was just very basic and lackluster. Like, if you just think of mystery, like, the most basic mystery novel that you can think of is probably this book. I really liked Fran's personality and her wit in the first book, which made that one kind of stand out for me, but this one was just kind of more of the same. This book almost felt like it was from later in the series, where the author just kind of hit her stride and kind of just started writing kind of the same thing over and over, but only in the second book. Like, I don't know, I just wasn't compelled by this at all. I didn't find the mystery compelling, I didn't find the story compelling, like, none of it I really cared about. So I actually might not continue the series from here on onwards. Definitely let me know if you have read more in this series, and if it does get better, because this book does not make me very motivated. Another very disappointing book that you probably already know about was The Bells by Daniel Clayton. I read this very early in the year. I did an individual review of it, and so many of you agreed with the points I made, and I was really glad that I wasn't the only one feeling this way, because this book was just not good. I liked the basic idea of it, and I liked what he was trying to achieve, but I didn't like the execution at all. The main character was so bland, and she only ever reacted to events instead of proactively doing anything, and then we're supposed to, like, feel like she's some sort of heroine because she just reacts to things. She just keeps thinking of doing something but never actually does it. The world building is very confusing and very, like, focused on the wrong things in my opinion, and I just did not enjoy this. I really like the Tiny Pretty Things duology that she wrote in collaboration with Sona Terapatra. That was also YA, but it was contemporary and about ballet and kind of just more my style, but I don't think that fantasy really is her thing, and I just didn't enjoy this, like, all that much. I think I gave this about 2 stars. The next book is disappointing because the previous books were so much better, and that is Morning Star by Pierce Brown. I marathoned this trilogy. I know it's no longer a trilogy, but there's a time jump between book 3 and 4, so I'm still just counting it as, like, the original trilogy. So I read Red Rising, I read Red Rising, Golden Sun, and this one in about a week. and by the end of this book I was entirely burnt out. Actually, I probably was burnt out before the end of it, and that might have contributed to my not enjoying this as much, but the main part was that I felt like this book was just one ongoing space battle with no real point to it, and it just dragged on, and I did not care anymore. I don't even really know what happened in this anymore because I'm pretty sure I skimmed like the last bit of it. It's like 500 pages, and I think about 350 of them are space battle, and it's just so much. Way too much. I really enjoyed the first two books, but for this one, just it fell short for me. It wasn't a satisfying ending, really. There were some weird plot developments that I couldn't get behind, and I just basically wanted this book to be over, and I was very glad when it finally was. I don't think that by itself this is a bad book, but I feel like in comparison to the first two, it just doesn't live up to the standard that they set, so that's really the main reason I was so disappointed in this one. The next book I'm just gonna mention in passing. It is probably my most disappointing book of the year, but I've already talked about it so much in other videos, including my highlights of 2018, that I don't want to go into too much detail, but that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I know so many people love this book, and I honestly, and this does not happen very much, but honestly I do not understand why. I do not feel like we read the same book. I think objectively speaking, this is a bad book. The way that it is structured, the way that the scene and the setting jumps from like one place to a completely different one halfway through, the way that pretty much all of the characters are entirely swapped out at the middle point, and then the new characters are not developed at all. The way that the story just meanders around and doesn't really have a point. Like, I don't understand how people enjoy this. It's nothing against you if you enjoy it, I just don't understand it. This book could have been a really great book. I really enjoyed the first section. It did feel a little generic, but it felt good. I enjoyed it. I had fun. I felt like the main character had motivations and things to do and things to live for, and then it just all went to shit, pretty much. Like, all of that wonderful setup that had been done was just wasted, and it's really sad, and it made me really resentful, honestly, because it was just so frustrating. I invested myself in this book. I wanted to like it. I wanted to care about the characters. I did care about the characters. And then it just like became an entirely different book about halfway through. And I was not happy about that. The next book I'm gonna get more flack for than I already have, because people seem to interpret it differently, and that's okay, but I feel like they're not really allowing for my interpretation. Anyway, let's just get to it. That is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I said in my review of this that I don't like the way that the monster is depicted in this book because I think it doesn't send the right message. So from the actions of the monster and of Frankenstein, I feel like the monster is actually Frankenstein. But none of the characters in the book ever even so much as acknowledge this. Not even the monster himself. And I feel like this is like the point of discussion, right? Because people have been telling me very nicely that, yeah, I'm too stupid because I need things spelled out for me, otherwise I don't get it. Like, thank you very much if you're the person, one of the people who told me that. I do get it. I do get that maybe Mary Shelley wrote this book with the intention of making you feel exactly this way, making you feel sympathy for the monster and feel like Frankenstein is pretty much an asshole. And that is how I came out of it. I still think that in the book it wasn't conveyed well enough that that is the truth, I guess, or like that is how the author feels as well, because I think depending on who reads this, you could also come out of it thinking that, yeah, Frankenstein is like so poor because he's being haunted and tortured by this monster, and the monster is just a monster. And I think it's always a contentious point, like the question of death of the author, right? Like, is the author's intention even relevant when that's not what comes across to the reader? And in this case, I think it's not really relevant. Because I didn't get the impression at all that we were supposed to have sympathy for the monster, and that made me angry. And so I didn't enjoy this book. I was disappointed. Again, I enjoyed the first half of it or so, and then it just turned pretty much into a single continuous pity party for Frankenstein, where he would literally have like ongoing monologues about how sad he is and how horrible his life is, and I'm just like, thank you for that. Wow, great. I feel no pity for you. So some of you will already hate me for that alone, but why not make it worse? Because I was also incredibly disappointed with A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This book is so freaking popular that I felt like it's probably impossible for me to not like it if so many people from like all different reading tastes and ages and whatever enjoy it. But I didn't. There was very little world building in this, and this is the reason why you hear the same synopsis of the book over and over again, because that's all there is. There's like 3 different Londons, they have varying levels of magic, and then there's the Antari that can travel between them. That's the plot. That's the whole thing. Like, there's nothing more than that. The characters are kind of annoying, especially Layla. I've said before, I want her to die, and I just don't get the appeal. It's not that good. I mean, the writing style isn't terrible. The world building, it's not very much there, but it's not terrible. The characters are annoying, but not terrible. Like, it's not the worst book ever. But it's also definitely not the best book ever, and it definitely does not make me want to read the sequels. So this was disappointing. I gave it 2 stars. It's just bland. Like, there's nothing special about this book to me at all. This next book is more recent, but just as disappointing. And that is Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. This is I don't know if it's a modern Japanese classic, but I think you could call it that. It was written in like the 50s or so, and it's 2 intertwining stories about grief, motherhood, and transsexuality, and I thought that was really interesting because or it still is, a very taboo subject still in Japan. So that would have been interesting, but the book doesn't really talk about that at all. I don't actually know what the point of the book is, except to just include a transsexual person in a random story that didn't really have a point. And while that may be good for representation, I think it's actually more important to include like marginalized people in like just normal stories instead of making it all about that thing. But there was no point to these stories. Like, I felt like they were just words strung together that led nowhere, and I didn't really get anything out of this. I also felt like the translation itself was pretty bad from the Japanese into English. I had to sometimes translate words back into Japanese to understand the point of what they were trying to make. So for example, they used the word relationship in a sentence where it was supposed to be connection, and I think it's just the wrong translation of kanke. Like, it has many different translations that mean kind of the same thing, but like it's just the wrong English word to use in that setting. So it just annoyed me, and I probably should have read this in Japanese, yes. And the fact that the translation is bad is not the fault of the book, yes, but I just was disappointed by this, and I expected so much more. So we're just about halfway through now, so this is gonna be a long video. The next book I was quite disappointed by is Uzumaki by Junji Ito. This is a Japanese manga collection of all the mangas in this Uzumaki series. Uzumaki, if you didn't know, means spiral, and this is like a horror manga about a town that's haunted by spirals, and people become obsessed with spirals and then they die in gruesome ways. And the art is A, stunning, and B, terrifying a lot of the times. It's really creepy. It's the rest of the book is in black and white, but the end pages are color, which I think is really cool, so I quite like this bind-up edition. And here's some scary pictures for your viewing pleasure, if you can see that, I don't know. But basically the story in this is non-existent, and some people were commenting like, you shouldn't have expected a good story, it's like about the art, but like, can I not have both? Like, why do I have to like limit myself to only wanting gruesome art and not wanting a scary, suspenseful story? I kind of started reading waiting for it to like scare the shit out of me, but it never really did. There never was really a lot of suspense. It was very, very focused on just letting the art do the scaring, and honestly, for me, that's not enough. I do like scary art and like gruesome pictures, but I need there to be some sort of backbone to that for me to actually find it scary. Like, just seeing a picture isn't gonna do the job, right? Because I think we've all been kind of desensitized a lot by seeing pictures like that all the time, and it's like, well, I don't know the story. Like, there's no story, so why would I find the picture scary? And that's kind of how I felt about this. I was really disappointed. I did end up reading the whole thing because I kept hoping for something to happen, but pretty much every single manga volume or edition, the same thing happens. And it's like slight variation, but the same thing happens, and it's just so boring. Actually, I was bored by a horror manga. Like, I never want to be bored by horror. That's really the wrong reaction to have. Another book people are gonna hate me for. Yay! The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Another one of these hyped up books that just wasn't it for me. This book, as you probably know, follows a lady who is a journalist, and she gets an email or a call or whatever by a famous actress who has never told her life story before, and now she wants to tell it to her, and she doesn't know why. So she tells her the story about like her whole life and the 7 husbands that she's had, and that's the book. And it's very lackluster. I felt like it was trying to send some bad messages. I felt like it was trying to be much more deep than it turned out being. It was just chick lit. And that's fine, but you should also own it. Like, don't pretend to be something else when you're not. And the way that the book was talking, or the characters were talking, often made it seem like they were trying to like impress something very important on you and like lead you in like a really specific direction, and it just felt so forced and over the top and like out of place in a book like this. Also, and this is kind of retrospectively disappointing, I just read The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield, which was published about 10 years before this book, and it's the same. The setup is exactly the same. In The 13th Tale, a biographer gets a letter from a famous author who has only ever told lies and never told her real life story. And she writes in this letter, "I want to finally tell my life story to you." And the biographer doesn't know why she picked her. Dun dun dun. Like, seriously, this is the same book. I know everything else is different. I'm conceding that. But she literally stole the idea. Like, the setup is just not her idea. So, and it's not even a good book. So, I was just on all ends disappointed with this one. Do read The 13th Tale though, it's a much better book. And if you're gonna read both, read The 13th Tale first, I would say. The next book I was disappointed by was still a good book, but I still found it disappointing. And that is Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. I think I gave this book about 3 stars, and the main reason is because A, I didn't like how the Farseer trilogy ended, which this is the final book, and I didn't like the extended, and I mean extremely extended travel scenes that served no purpose. I've said before, that bothers me in books to no end, and this book just wouldn't stop having people travel. And he was annoying, and he was probably the main reason I didn't like it. And then yeah, the ending was unsatisfying. I wasn't happy with where the story went. It was a really good trilogy. I really enjoyed the first 2 books, but this one just it just didn't really do it for me. Next we have Unburied Carol by Josh Malaman. The reason this disappointed me is because I really liked Bird Box by him, and this was his newest 2018 release, and I wanted to read it. It seemed to be about a woman being buried alive, and since that is probably one of the biggest fears of everybody, I thought it would be really cool and really interesting. But it's just really weird and really confusing. The book is kind of a western, but I never really knew what time period it was supposed to be set in, because it has like these old-timey vibes, but then a lot of very modern elements that to me clashed extremely. There wasn't really much suspense. I didn't really know what the point of the story really was, what it was trying to say, what it was trying to do, so I just found it confusing all around. It wasn't really suspenseful, it wasn't really scary. It definitely was nowhere near as good as Bird Box, and so that's just disappointing when an author you technically like, at least, I mean, based on Bird Box, I've never read anything else by him, just writes a book that's just kind of meh. And second to last, we have I Let You Go by Claire McIntosh, another book that I think is just way overhyped, which is the main reason I found it disappointing. The plot twist in this is unpredictable, so I will give it that, but at the same time, that's literally the only thing that sets this book apart 1 inch. Like, that is it. And if you take the plot twist out, it's just a very basic story. And I just don't like thrillers or mysteries or whatever that are too reliant on the plot twist to carry the overall book. Like, sure, it's fun and cool if there's a good plot twist in a book that you didn't see coming, but there needs to be more to it as well. And I want a good story around that, because then as soon as the plot twist happens, you just stop caring. And that's unfortunately what happened for me with this book. I just felt like it was too gimmicky, I guess, and it didn't really put enough focus and effort into developing an overall good story. And then finally I have Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. Again, the reason I just didn't quite love this as much is because I read Into Thin Air by him before and I loved that book. And this was kind of unnecessary, I think. This could have been condensed way down to just the article that he wrote on this guy traveling to the Alaskan wilds and dying. There just wasn't enough to it, I think, to put it into a full book. He seemed to be really reaching in a lot of the times when he tried to like pad the story and like give other backstory. And while I really cared about the backstory of other elements and like where he was branching out a little bit from the main topic and Into Thin Air, I didn't really care about that at all in this one. I felt it was superfluous, and I honestly just felt like this entire story of this guy was just like not really worth telling. You have just a rich, privileged guy who decides he doesn't want to live the normal life anymore, and he literally burns his money and throws his stuff away instead of like doing something useful with that, and just goes into the wild completely unprepared, thinking he's too cool for school and like he doesn't need help and he doesn't need anything that other people, like any sort of training or any sort of preparation. And then he dies, and it's just really hard to feel sympathetic for him. Like, of course he dies. He kind of deserves it because he didn't prevent it. He didn't do anything to prevent it. So it just wasn't as captivating, I guess, as Into Thin Air, and I really didn't sympathize with him at all. And that's it for all of the most disappointing books that I read in 2018. There's quite a few of them, but I did read over 100 books, so there's bound to be a few duds and a few books that I just like don't live up to the hype, basically. Let me know all of your guys' thoughts on these books in the comments down below, and also let me know what is your most disappointing book that you read this year. I think it's almost worse to read disappointing books than straight up bad books, because at least with those, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into pretty early on, and with these, you're kind of just like already invested, and then they let you down, so much worse in my opinion. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, because, as you know, I'm coming out with all of these end of the year wrap-up videos now, and in the next 2 weeks specifically, there's gonna be a ton of these. So click the bell notification to know when they go up, and I hope to see you back very soon. Until then, have a very lovely week. Bye!